All right. Good morning, everyone. Again, for some of you, welcome to Monday and to February. And it was week 4, Zerlinda said, right? Week 4? Wow. Time goes so fast. Yeah, I don't have anything interesting to tell you at the top of the class here. Does anyone have anything interesting they want to share with us? I don't have a little, I don't seem to have a little thing to say. So, good weekend? Bad weekend? What happened?
Tests.
Huh?
I was doing a test.
Oh, you were doing a test. What kind of test?
Physics.
Well, that doesn't sound fun at all.
Never.
Was not?
Also like a short homework for physics.
Oh.
The homework's valuable.
I thought you'd be into physics because cars are all about physics and chemistry. But you prefer to drive the cars rather than analyze all the forces that are happening? Yeah. It's definitely the fun part is driving, for sure. Okay, here we go. So, Hadil is here. Good morning, Hadil. Michelle is here. Good morning, Michelle. Adon is here. Hello, Adon. Probably good evening to you, I suppose. Basil's here. Good morning, Basil. Is this Sarah? I'm not sure who that is, but hello to you. And Irina's here. Good morning to you. Okay, so on Friday, we were talking about, right? We were talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? The semi-mythical king of Uruk. Again, in the king's list, there is a Gilgamesh mentioned, but based on the story that we heard on Friday, the Epic of Gilgamesh is probably not a factual documentary on his life, right? There's lots of fantastical things happening, right? And so the Epic of Gilgamesh isn't really factual history, it's more what we would call myth, right? And we said that myths were stories that were common to every culture, that myths usually contain some element of the fantastic, so there's people with superpowers, or there's gods, or there's monsters that don't exist in real life, or there's something kind of above and beyond reality happening in the story, right? We said that myths were generally passed down generation after generation, and so the story of Gilgamesh was first written down in about 2100 BC, I believe, but it's probably older than that, right? That story had probably been told for maybe generations before that time, and then they finally wrote it down. And we said that myths often contain a moral, right? A lesson, a thing that we're supposed to learn from them. And maybe even more than that, myths encode, I'm just going to go like this. Myths encode cultural beliefs, right? And so there are values and things about the culture that are woven into the myth. And part of the thing is that that's why people like it. That's why the myth makes sense. The myth makes sense to people because it encodes their social values. Remember when we were talking about the football game? And then I went off on that thing about hockey. But when we were talking about the football game, I suggested to you that maybe one of the reasons why Americans love their football so much is that the game makes sense to them. Not in a logical way, but in a kind of a values way, right? They believe in the things that the football game also believes in. And myths are kind of the same, is that myths make sense because they contain things that a culture likes and understands and already believes, right? And we could probably say the same thing about, let's say, Avengers, right? So any of the Marvel movies or the Avengers movies, we could say that they're popular because they encode beliefs and values that we also hold, right? That's why people like them so much, because there are things going on there that resonates with us, right? And it could be all kinds of things. Those movies are, they do have a lot of things going on for them, and so, they resonate with us because they hold those cultural beliefs and values. So, right, so I said that. And then we briefly talked about the hero's journey on Friday, and we said that hero's journey was something that Joseph Campbell thought he saw when he was studying all kinds of world myths, right? So he was an academic. He was interested in myths of different cultures. He did a lot of reading and studying, and what he thought he saw was a very predictable pattern in how these stories unfolded, right? And so he said that most of these heroes' journeys included a departure and then some sort of initiation, some sort of trial that the hero goes through. They receive a reward and they return home changed in some way, right? And again, those are very general ideas. The details always differ, but Joseph Campbell thought he saw the same things, right? And so he kind of plotted out the hero's journey just like this, right? And it's kind of interesting because, again, they mentioned that sometimes these things happen in a different order, okay? So sometimes, tests enemies and allies doesn't necessarily happen at step 6. Sometimes it happens in different places. But all of these steps kind of happen in a somewhat predictable order, and there's a pattern to them. And again, these happen in world myths, and they continue to happen, which is very interesting. They continue to happen in stories today. And so the Matrix movie, if you've ever seen it, follows this pattern. The original Star Wars follows this pattern. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone follows this pattern. The original Spider-Man movie from was it 2000? Has anyone seen that one with Tobey Maguire? That movie follows this pattern as well. The Lord of the Rings follows this pattern as well. And so, and that's just a few, right? There's tons and tons of movies and books that follow this sort of very predictable pattern. And it's very interesting, and it kind of leads to the question of what is it about this kind of story that humans seem to like, right? Because humans have been telling this, if you believe Joseph Campbell, humans have been telling this story for thousands of years. The Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, it's the same thing. Humans have been telling the same story over and over for thousands of years, just with different details, different characters, different events. And, I kind of, suggested that, maybe this is kind of a metaphor for life. Maybe that's why it works, right? Because we can imagine the hero's journey as our own life journey, right? We can imagine the journey that we're on as kind of represented in story by our heroes, right? Maybe. I don't know. I'm theorizing here. But from that Epic of Gilgamesh, we said we can probably learn a few things. We can learn about maybe some things that the Mesopotamians valued, right? So Gilgamesh was certainly persistent, right? He went to all ends to, he wanted to find eternal life, right? And he walked for leagues and leagues, which I don't know how long a league is, but it's quite a long distance. He went into the underworld and walked in the darkness forever and ever. He sought and, worked hard to try to acquire that thing that he wanted. He was brave and courageous, right? Even though he was a demigod, he still fought a terrifying monster, which might have killed him, right? He still ventured into the underworld that, I don't really believe in an underworld, but if I did, I'm not sure that it's a place I would venture, right? I would probably stay out, right? So he's very brave, he's very courageous. But he's also redeemed in the end, which is, I think, another sort of value that crosses cultures, right? He starts out as kind of a bad dude, right? He starts out as kind of not a great king. He's, having sex with other people's wives, and he's very boorish, and he doesn't care about the people, and he's a crappy king, right? He's a kind of a crappy human being. But by the end, he redeems himself, and in the story, the people actually mourn him when he dies, right? And that's another kind of popular idea as well. Can you think of a character that you know from film or from story that where they are redeemed. They start off bad, but they're good in the end.
Iron Man.
Great one. What do you think about Iron Man? Right? What's that?
Never watched it.
Never watched it? Okay, well, spoiler alerts. So, but what does Tony Stark start off as? A selfish,
He's a jerk.
he's a jerk. He was a self-involved, selfish, rich guy, didn't really care about anyone or anything, about just his inventions. And then where does he wind up? Saving people, well, dead at the, spoiler alert, yeah, but at the end of Iron Man, the first Iron Man, he winds up as a hero, a superhero, right? He winds up as someone who protects people and is concerned about the public good, right? And so, you know, at the beginning, he's, yeah, like he doesn't really care about anything, right? And at the end, when he makes that, you know, when he's at the press conference there, at the end, he realizes he's something different, right? That's the hero's journey as well. His call to adventure is where he's in Afghanistan and he gets hit by that shrapnel, right? He's called to adventure. He returns home. He gains this, you know, he builds this suit, but he also gains this understanding that, he gains purpose, right? That's his reward, is purpose. His life really doesn't have a purpose before, right? He's just bouncing around. He's inventing all kinds of things and making money. He doesn't seem to care too much about it, right? Like he gives that big weapons demonstration with all those Jericho missiles, but he's like, yeah, you know, he shows the military and he's like, yeah, to peace. And he doesn't really seem to care about any of it, right? But then he gains purpose. And then the last thing he says is that purpose, right? The last thing he says in the movie is, I am Iron Man, right? And he sort of reaffirms that idea. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Redemption. Gilgamesh is Iron Man, in a way, in a certain way. We see a little bit about Mesopotamian or Sumerian beliefs, right? We have multiple gods in this story, right? And we kind of see what the gods are like. They interact with humans, even to the point where Ishtar, the goddess of love, wants to marry Gilgamesh, but they deserve respect, right? And if they don't get it, bad things happen, right? And Gilgamesh's friend Enkidu doesn't respect Ishtar, and he pays the price, right? He dies. And again, what does it mean to be a hero? And we said that here Gilgamesh doesn't succeed because he's so strong or so powerful or because he's part divine. He succeeds in his humanity, right? In realizing that he's a person, right? And he's going to die. And what he realizes is that the way to become immortal, I don't know if it's said in the video, but the way to become immortal is through the things that you do in life. That's how you gain immortality, is that you do things that people will remember, right? You do things that people will continue to talk about. That's how you achieve immortality. You cannot live forever, but your deeds, the things that you do, can, right? And in a way, I would argue, I think he has achieved immortality, hasn't he? Because here we are, at least 4,000 years later, still talking about this guy, right? So in a way, he has done it, right? He has achieved his immortality, just not in the way he thought he did. Right, so I have a little bit from the textbook for you to read on Mesopotamian empires. It talks a little bit about how the sort of history of Mesopotamia sort of proceeds as the Sumerians are replaced by the Akkadians and Hittites and et cetera, et cetera. It'll talk a little bit about empires. Empires will be important later because once we have the first empire, people will see them and then everyone will want an empire of their very own. So we'll hear more about empires as we go further. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the legacies of this civilization. So even though this civilization was the first one or one of the first ones on the planet, and it was so long ago, there are still things that we have inherited from it, which is pretty interesting. So it's just actually it's a little bit of a longer section this time, but I'll give you some time to read. We'll talk about what we've learned, and then we'll be ready to move on to Egypt, but I'll talk about our paper assignment before we do that, okay? So a little bit on Mesopotamian empires, legacies of Mesopotamia, paper, and then probably tomorrow, Egypt. Coolio? Okay. I'm going to put some time on the clock, and we'll start reading. Bless you. Sorry, maybe let's start on page 31 if you don't mind. I think I have the pages wrong there, but the Mesopotamian empires section starts on page 31. So let's go 31 to, there's the Assyrians. Yeah, let's go 31 to 37, I think. 31 to 37. Sorry, 38. 31 to 38. Yeah, so stop at the Israelites section. Bless you. Mm-hmm. Okay, okay. All right. Can we talk about some of this? Obviously, there's a lot of information in that section, but that's okay. Let's start off with the first one. So this section talks about the fact that there are multiple empires that appear in this region, right? There's kind of one after another. There's the Akkadian Empire, and then the Babylonians, and then the, Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians? Assyrians, and then the Neo-Babylonians, right? So there's a few different groups that kind of gain control of this part of the world, and they create an empire. And what is an empire?
A large territory encompassing numerous states ruled by a single force.
Yeah, so an empire is something that is ruled centrally from a central ruler or a central state, but it also has lots of other states that it has brought into its control, right? So places that were formerly independent or were their own state are now under the control of the empire. Sounds like a Star Wars movie. And now they are under the control of the empire, right? And mostly those areas come under the control of the empire through violence, right? Through warfare. You go out with your army and you conquer neighboring territories. You make them do what you want, and you make them give tribute, right? They have to send money or goods to you every year. And if they don't, then you bring your armies back and kick their butts again, right? So yeah, this kind of this sort of empire form of political organization and sort of state organization is brand new, right? For the first empire, for Sargon of Akkad, this is kind of a new thing where he gains control of all of these other states that are around him. But of course, it won't be the last empire. There will be lots and lots of other ones that follow it. So Sargon, I wanted to point out, what's his origin story? Does it sound familiar? Yeah? What does it sound like? Something like we've seen in a movie? It sounds like the Prince of Egypt story, right? Which, if you read the Bible, is the Moses story, right? Yeah, so Moses is, sometimes the details vary, but yeah, his mother cannot care for him, and she puts him in a basket and sends him down the river, and he is found by Egyptian royalty and is raised, in the Egyptian royal house, right? And so here we have Sargon of Akkad coming centuries earlier than that, having, interestingly, the same origin story. His, mother putting him in a basket and sending him down the river, which makes you wonder how many babies got sent down the river in this time. You probably go down to the river and just watch all these baskets of kids floating by. No. But it's interesting that the story is the same, right? We didn't have time for this either, but as part of the Gilgamesh story, there's also a flood story. There's a story of the earth being entirely flooded. And for those of you who have, some knowledge of the Judeo-Christian tradition, there's also a very popular flood story in the Bible, right? With Noah and his ark and all the animals on the ark. So it's kind of interesting, and I'm not saying one thing or another, but it's kind of interesting that these stories seem to appear in different cultures at different times, right? The flood story, the baby in the basket kind of story. So yeah, very, very interesting. What's significant about Hammurabi? He was the Assyrian? Babylonian. What's Hammurabi's code? What is it? It's part of it. It's a law. Yeah, so it's a stele, right? It's a stone column, if you will, and it's got a bunch of inscriptions on it, and inscribed on it is our laws, right? Which is very interesting because, why is this interesting? Yeah, it's still intact. We can read it, but Most of them is, yeah, most of the punishments seem to be death. It's a harsh time to be alive. And it's the,
First one?
yeah, and it's the first set of laws that we have written down, right? So we can actually tell what the rules were, right? And it's very interesting what's going on here, because often with kings, basically what the king says is law, right? The king says this, that's what we're doing, the end, right? But here, Hammurabi has actually inscribed a bunch of laws so he doesn't have to keep making decisions, right? He doesn't have to, you don't have to keep dragging people before the king and say, look, this slave struck me. What shall we do with him, right? And Hammurabi's got to go, oh, okay, fine, put him to death, right? You know, it's busy when you're the king of an empire. You have a lot of things to do, right? And so you don't have time to keep passing judgment on people. And so he writes it down and he says, yeah, if this happens, this is the punishment, right? So he kind of standardizes laws and punishment throughout his empire. And what's so interesting about the top of the stele? There's a little scene going on there. What's going on?
God of justice.
Yeah, what's the God of justice doing?
Standing in front of him.
Standing in front of him and like giving him something, right? He's so where does the authority come from for Hammurabi to give these laws to the people? Yeah, it comes from up there, right? The gods have given me the power to rule over you, and here's the laws, right? So are those laws to be challenged? No, because they come, what's that?
At that time, no.
No, because they come from the gods, right? They are legitimized because they come from the gods. Kind of the same thing again, if you know your Bible stories where Moses, well after the floating down the river thing, but what does he do? He comes down from Mount Horeb with those 2 tablets, right? The 10 Commandments. And did he go up there to brainstorm? No, he went up there and God gave him the rules, right? With the hand of God, God wrote on the tablets. And so Moses comes down and says, okay, you Hebrews, here are the rules, right? And so they are legitimized, they are made powerful because they don't come from Moses and they don't come from Hammurabi, come from the gods, right? And you must obey because you obey the gods, right? That's otherwise.
Yeah, it's almost like religion is to control people.
It's almost like religion is used to control people. Well, that would be a very anthropological way of looking at it, right? Is that religion is a form of social control. And you wouldn't be the first one to suggest that. Lots of sociologists and anthropologists have suggested that. Karl Marx has suggested that. So you're definitely not the first to say so. But many people say that, yeah, one of the functions of religion is social control. It helps keep the people following the rules, right? You might want to kill someone, but you know if you kill them, you will be, cast into a pit of fire for all eternity. That's a pretty strong deterrent, right? That might keep you from killing someone. Let's see here. Number 3, the rulers of ancient Mesopotamian empires attempt to bring together and control the people within their realms. How did these rulers attempt to kind of control their empires? Which I imagine would be tricky thousands of years ago. How did they control them? Probably through violence and threat, right? So if you were conquered by Hammurabi and you didn't do what he said or you didn't give tribute every year, yeah, he would probably bring his armies back and sort you out, right? So there's threat of violence.
Burning and damaging houses and farms.
Yes, let's put that under kind of violence, right? So bad things might happen to you. What else?
Socially, like punish them. So when there's written rules, when people break them, like they're like breaking a formal social norms, so other people are gonna socially sanction them.
Okay, so if we borrow a page from sociology and social justice, that social norms and social rules help to keep people in line and keep people following the rules. How did Hammurabi make sure that everybody knew the rules?
Setting punishments.
Yes, but what did he do with those stone things?
He wrote it down.
Yeah, he wrote it down and then he put them all over the place, right? So he had all kinds of statues of Hammurabi, probably looking heroic, right? There was all sorts of copies of that law code distributed throughout the empire so that you knew as you walked through the streets, you could look up at the statue and say, oh, there he is, the ruler. And I'm sure the statue of him was looking very heroic and strong, right? So if you disobeyed Hammurabi, you would have to deal with this strong, heroic figure, right? So his laws were everywhere. Stories of his exploits were everywhere. His law code was everywhere. So he kind of attempted to make sure people knew who he was, right? And what he stood for. Okay, and maybe the last thing, what were some of the legacies of this civilization? What kind of things have we inherited from this first civilization?
Setting laws.
Huh?
Setting laws.
Yeah, the idea of a written law code is something that we still use. And very interestingly, we still use that. Like, who has heard that phrase before, an eye for an eye?
We have it
What's that? You have it?
in Islam,
What do you mean you have it?
like this rule,
Yeah.
and also in Islam.
Also, yeah, also in Islam. So that law has kind of permeated, right? And so, Hammurabi's code here was originated in a Mesopotamian civilization, but that civilization was in contact with other parts of the world as well, right? Parts of the world where Judaism would later start to grow and develop, or where it was growing and developing, where Islam was growing and developing. And so there's connections, right? There are ideas that continue to circulate. And it's interesting that thousands of years later, we know that phrase, right? An eye for an eye, right? And it's very much a part of Hammurabi's code. So that kind of idea, right? If you take something from me, I get to take the same thing from you. And the idea of written law codes, both of those things are things we still do, right? To some degree.
Or king or president.
Okay, so monocratic. What's the word I'm looking for? Monogamy, monarchies. I had a bit of a fog there. Yeah, monarchies, right? Monarchies are still something that we use. Not quite so much anymore. A lot of us are democratic, but monarchy is something that was done for a long time after that. What else? What else do we kind of inherit from them? What's that? That doesn't necessarily come from here, but it will come from that part of the world.
Yeah, something about Abraham.
What's the story of Abraham? Yeah, yeah, but does he have a connection to like Babylon or Assyria?
We just read that.
Sorry, where was it? Did I miss that?
It was in the textbook.
Oh, okay, hang on. This is farming. Where does it say that? Oh, the Israelite part. Abraham. Oh, okay. So, right. So, right. So, sorry, I didn't read that part. But yeah. So Abraham Abraham is said to have been someone who lived in Ur in southern Mesopotamia. So I guess there's a thread of kind of Old Testament Bible history that winds its way back to this part of the world in this period of history, right? So he's kind of connected in that way as well. What else? There was some mathy stuff too. Sorry to bring math in here, but what did they say? Oh yeah, the Sumerians had a computation system based on 60s, right? And so we still use units of 60 sometimes too, right? We have 60 seconds in a minute, right? We use a 360-degree circle, and so we've kind of inherited some of those things from the Sumerians, right? And the Mesopotamian cultures that came later. There's a few more things that I'll point out to you, but maybe what we'll do is we'll take a break because we've been working hard for an hour here. Take 10, come back. We'll talk about, we'll kind of wrap this a little bit up, and then we'll talk about paper stuff, okay? All right. All right, and we're back. So again, there's this, increasing complexity of culture and society developing in Mesopotamia, starting, probably around 7,000 years ago. But by the time we get to about 5,000 years ago, there's these urban centers developing. There's big temples in the middle. And there's kind of complex forms of social and political organization. And then by the time we get into, this section of the textbook takes us all the way up to about maybe 600 BC or so. We have large empires being built and won and lost. There's cities that have a million or so people living in them, which is unbelievable, right? For thousands of years ago, think about a city that exists. We have about 2.4 million people living in the lower mainland here. So think of just one of these cities being roughly half the size of that, right? Thousands of years ago. Incredible. Right, so we said that an empire is kind of a state that's formed by a collection of different nations or other people. They're kind of ruled over by an emperor or a king or some sort of single ruler. And usually that territory is controlled by military force, right? By threat of violence. If you don't do what the ruler says, the army is coming back, right? And it's not going to be pretty. So these empires are coercive, right? What does it mean to coerce? What does it mean to coerce someone? You would not quite, but you're kind of in the right area. What does it mean to coerce? It can be. Can be. Coercing someone, or in this case a state, but coercing someone is like trying to make them do something that maybe they don't want to do. And so you might do it verbally, right? Come on, just do it, or else you're in big trouble, right? So people might try to coerce you to do something that you might not want to do. Here, these empires are coercive, right? So these other states might not want to be part of the empire, but the center of the empire will make sure that they are, right? And they rule over them. Right? This isn't the EU, right? This isn't a bunch of states that have joined together to cooperate. This is one state is in charge and the other states are in charge of them. It's hegemonic. And hegemony is like to have power over. So this isn't a cooperative alliance. This is one group has the power and they're ruling over the other one, right? And empires, I said, receive tribute from the conquered states. And so if you've been conquered by an empire, you usually have to send money or goods or maybe both every year as your tribute, right? Thank you so much for letting us be in your empire, even though we didn't want to be in the first place. And if we say no, you'll kill us all. But thank you. So here is your tribute, right? Hey, nobody ever said life was fair 4,000 years ago, right? But the other thing that's kind of useful is that even though some of these states didn't choose to become part of the empire, being part of an empire is actually beneficial, right? Because you're connected to other states, there's trade and money going through. In some ways, you'll be protected by the empire because the empire doesn't want other places taking you over. So there are kind of some benefits to being in an empire, even if you didn't choose to be in one in the first place. And lots of empires, at least in this day and age, don't try to change your state very much, right? They basically come in, they say, you're going to do what we say and give us tribute, right? Right. Okay. See you later. And basically everything stays the same. You just have to pay money to them, right? Most empires don't kind of rule their territories very closely. They tend to leave regular leaders in power. Not always, but sometimes. So again, being in an empire is often not a choice, and if you try to resist, you will be slaughtered. But being in an empire can have benefits as well. And for people in this time and place, trade and protection are important considerations. And if you're part of the empire, at least you can count on the fact that the Babylonians will defend you from, those barbarians in the mountains kind of thing, right? The Code of Hammurabi here dates to about 1754 BCE, so it's about 3,700, let's say 3,800 years ago. And again, we see the world's first law code that is written out, right? And the law code makes it clear that justice comes from not the king himself, but from the gods through the king. So there's a lot of legitimacy to those rules. But it also sorts out society in terms of the stratification, right? It sorts it out in terms of who has more and less power, because the punishments are different, right? Yes. Yeah, so if a freedman or a noble does something, they pay a fine, right? If you're a slave and you do something, it's not going to turn out well for you, right? You're going to have a part of you cut off, or probably you're going to be put to death, right? Which is a common punishment in this day and age, right? So, what's that?
Not common.
What's that?
Not common.
Not common?
No.
Well, it seems like a lot of people got put to death for offenses here, right?
Well, in that era,
I don't know how many people would have died, but that was the punishment, right? If you did something. So it's kind of not like, it's not like what we have now, right? In theory, here in Canada, the punishments are the same no matter who you are, with some flexibility, right? So if I murder someone and Justin Trudeau murders someone, in theory, we're both breaking the same law, and in theory, we should receive a similar punishment, right? Shouldn't be any different because he's the prime minister and I'm a nobody. In practice, it'll be a little different, but in theory, it's the same. I'm better?
yeah.
Yeah, he's got better hair though, right?
Unlike you are educating me.
That's true.
So many people, and he's just ruling us.
What has he done?
Legalized weed. Saving us.
Saving us? What's that?
Legalized weed.
He legalized weed, if that's important to you. Yeah, now I get to smell it even more than I smelled it before. Gross. Okay, it does stink, in my opinion. Okay. What else? Oh yeah, so here is one of these stelae, so these sort of stone columns, and you can see there's Hammurabi at the top, being given justice by the gods, right? And so here's a little section of it, and so you can see that Hammurabi is Assyrian, right? Babylonian. Keep mixing them up. So Hammurabi is Babylonian, but you can see that they're using the same script that the Sumerians developed, right? This is still cuneiform script, but interestingly, they're writing in their own language, right? So similar to if you're a Farsi speaker, you use Arabic characters, right? But it's not Arabic language, you're just using the script, right? And so here they kind of did the same thing. They borrowed the Sumerian script to write their own language, their Babylonian language. But yeah, miraculously, we can actually read this stuff and discern what it says. Not me, but
But kind of like give us an idea of how they had like supervision. They could read this small text, or they were printed on a big things.
are you asking how big it was printed?
Yeah. Because when we sound like that one, looks like I can carry it with one hand.
This looks to be about maybe 6 or 7 feet tall,
This one.
I think. To be honest, I'm not sure how tall this is.
It looks like it's being put in on a table, and there is a wall on a white. Looks like a white wall.
I don't know that it's on a table. I think it's sort of standing. It's in a museum. I think it's standing on the floor, and it looks like there's some little like glass walls around it to sort of encourage you not to go close to it. And so, I don't know, it looks like about 6 or 7 feet tall to me. What do you think?
Looks like almost the same tall as my body.
Oh, it definitely is not. It's definitely much bigger than that.
Oh,
At least that's the way it looks to me. I think it's quite tall. So, yeah, I think the characters on this would maybe be like a centimeter or so, maybe. I don't know. I wish I could tell you that I had seen it in real life, but I cannot tell you that. But yeah, there it is. Readable even after 3,800 years. The other thing that we haven't really talked about, but we'll just mention before leaving this group here, is that the Sumerians developed pretty advanced mathematics and astronomy. So again, you cannot build ziggurats and canals and cities with streets and buildings and irrigation and all kinds of things. You can't build that without math, right? You need to know how to calculate these things, how to lay out angles, how to survey, how to keep all the lines and angles going the right way. This is not easy stuff to do. And the Sumerians and later the Akkadians and Assyrians and Babylonians and all these people, they kind of knew how to do that too, right? The Sumerians were able to determine that there were 12 months in the year. They based their months on the phases of the moon, which we do as well, right? They also were able to correct it for the solar year, right? So they knew that a year was about 365 days or about 12 months, but they also knew it was a little off, right? So what do we do to kind of fix our calendar every 4 years? Yeah, we add a day in February, right? So our orbit around the sun is 365.25 days or something like that. So every 4 years, we add a February 29th to correct our calendar, right? And the Sumerians knew it too, right? The Sumerians knew that their calendar was a little bit off. So every 3 years, they had a 13th month. Clearly, their calendar was more inaccurate than ours. But I mean, this is also 5,000 years ago, right? Yeah, math and science. They had a 60 base numeral system, and we kind of inherited that. So we still have 60-minute hours and 24-hour days and 360-degree circles. The Sumerians had a 7-day week, just like we do. So they had a very similar looking calendar, even though it wasn't quite as accurate as ours. They had 7 days just like we did, right? They had figured out some mathematics. And again, they hadn't figured out pi, which is important to know if you're going to work with circles, but they came close, right? So they were using a value of pi as 25/8, which isn't quite correct, but it's pretty damn close for 4,000 years ago, I would say, right? So not only are they writing words and writing numbers, but they're doing the math, right? And they're getting it pretty much correct. What else do I have here? Oh, yeah, so this part of the world is pretty significant for human civilization and human history because we have a lot of firsts, right? First civilizations, first cities and urban centers, first kind of long-distance trade networks, first evidence of writing, first evidence of law codes, first evidence of monumental engineering, right? Building gigantic stone buildings and stone temples. Lots of firsts, right? Lots and lots of firsts happen here. And other civilizations will do those things as well, but for the most part, this is the first time it ever happens for humans, or at least one of the first times. Yeah. Okay, how's that feel? Huh?
too much information.
Too much. We're just getting started. Next, we have to do Egypt. I actually love Egypt. Has anyone been to Egypt? No? Does anyone want to go?
Yes.
Yeah? I'd like to go. I'd like to see it. Although, what's kind of the situation in What's kind of the situation in Egypt right now politically? What's that?
Corruption.
Yeah, it's kind of been that way for a while though, hasn't it? I mean, is it kind of safe for Basil? Basil says he's been there and it's amazing, which is cool. I'm envious. I'm envious. I know that they were. I know. Politically speaking, there was a bit of an Arab Spring going on, and they had, jailed the prime minister or the president or something, and it was a whole thing, and there was some sort of domestic terrorist activity, but I hadn't sort of kept tabs on what was going on there, but not like.
They are getting so much food.
Yeah.
They're quantity that.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure now they are because they depended on. I think they depend on tourist dollars, right, for a lot of a chunk of their economy, which they're probably not getting right now. So I assume they're probably suffering, sadly. Okay, we're going to talk about that, but we're going to press pause and talk about that tomorrow, okay? Because what I want to talk about now is the first paper that I'm going to assign to you, okay? So for those of you who are in social justice, there's a little bit of similarity, there's a little bit of overlap here, but not quite so much. Don't cringe too much. I'll make it painless. But so I'm going to ask you to write a micropaper, and again, what I said this morning is this is a thing that I have created that is supposed to be a research paper. It's just really small, right? And the point of that is, or at least my working theory is that if you can write a good short paper, you can write a good long one. It's just more work, right? So if you kind of know the things that you're trying to do, you can write a paper of any length. You can write a book if you so desire, right? Maybe does anyone want to write a book? Is that like a goal of theirs? Yeah? Your memoirs? Yeah? Indeed, if you can kind of start to do this and start to organize your writing, yeah, you can take it as far as you want, right? If you can plan it out and get references and put them together in an organized fashion, yeah, you can write something of any length, really. But what am I asking you to do here? Well, I'm asking you to find and evaluate information. So there's lots of information out there. Some of it's great, some of it's okay, some of it is completely wrong and bonkers. We need to be able to discern what's the good stuff and what we should ignore, right? I want you to be able to pull ideas and understandings out of that material and show me that you understand, right? Show me that you can not simply repeat what someone else said, but that you can understand it and you can work with it. And that you can think critically about those ideas as well, right? That shouldn't say social justice 12, that should say comparative cultures 12, so I apologize about that. I did not change that. I'm going to jump over that. There's a little thing about credibility of sources, but I think I'll get to that. I'll get to that tomorrow because I've already kind of done it today, and people who heard that once are probably going to be like, "Oh God, why are we doing this again?" We will talk about that tomorrow. Maybe what I will talk about right now is the assignment itself will pop up in Microsoft Teams in about half an hour. I've got it scheduled to pop up. So it will appear, and so you can see the assignment there, and you can also, when it's done, you can also submit it through Teams as well, okay? So you go in there, and there's a little thing that says add resources, and you just add resources, and then you attach your file, and then it gets submitted through Teams, and so I have everything in one place. Last term, I was having people email them to me, and Teams message them to me, and I was trying to sort of put them all in one place, and some of them I missed, and it was a gong show. So this time, if we submit them all through Teams, they'll be all in one place, and I won't miss anything, and it will be more organized. In a nutshell, what I'm going to be asking you to do is this. I'm going to be asking you to do a little bit of research on culture and story, okay? So I want to know, let me actually just pull up the document so I don't say the wrong thing, because sometimes that happens. What I want you to do is I want you to find an article that has an argument about culture and story, okay? So we were talking a little bit about, when we talked about the Epic of Gilgamesh, we were interested in the story, right, what the story was about, but we were also interested in what it said about the culture that told this story, right? Why was this story so interesting? What did the story tell us about the culture that enjoyed it? And so what I want you to do is do a little bit of digging and see if you can find an article that talks about something similar, right? The sort of the connection between story and culture, or story and society, okay? And it could be stories in general, it could be a particular story, okay, a particular story and how it relates to a particular culture. It could be a story that's thousands of years old, or it could be Breaking Bad, right? It could be something very current, although I know Breaking Bad is not current anymore, it's a few years old. That's kind of what I'm looking for, okay? So something that talks about the connection between a culture and or a society and a story that they tell, or a story that they kind of hold dear. I don't know what you're going to find, and I'm very interested to find out, but I think it'll be interesting to see what we can find in this regard. I'm very curious to know what kind of things might come up in terms of looking at cultural myths or sort of cultural stories or novels, or sort of more modern stuff in terms of TV or movies or modern literature, right? So any of those things might work, but you'll have to kind of do some research and dig around and see what you find. Yes.
So since it's about like cultures and different cultures, it can be from different language, but just translated to the
I would, for the source that you find, for the article that you find, I would like it to be in English so that I can at least read what you've read. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
it's from, obviously from different cultures, so
Yeah.
it is translated.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So as long as I can read what you've read, I'm good. Yeah. If it's in Vietnamese, it's hard for me to it's hard for me to do anything with, right? So. So that's kind of what I'll ask you to do. And so I'll ask you to find something that has an argument, something that has something that is trying to convince you of something, or tell you that, this story means this thing in this culture, or, the fact that we're telling stories like this means this about society or something, okay? And then you'll kind of give me your own reflections or comments on that idea. Do you believe it? Do you disbelieve it? Do you think it's correct? Do you think it's incorrect, and why? That's kind of what I'm looking for. And again, we did a little bit of a baby version of it with Gilgamesh, right? We looked at Gilgamesh and said, hey, what's going on in this story? What can we learn about the society that seems to like this story, right? Because again, when people like a story, it tells us something about their values, right? Because parts of the story resonate with them. And again, stories from other cultures sometimes resonate with another culture, an outside culture, and sometimes not so much, right? Because their sensibilities are different. But we can talk about that a little bit more maybe tomorrow. So yeah, so your paper will be maybe about a page and a half, maybe about like 800 words long. Kind of just long enough for a little bit of an introduction, a really short introduction, an explaining of your author's argument, kind of a response about what you think about their argument and what they said and whether you agree or disagree or why not. And then a little conclusion, and then you'll cite your source, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But that's kind of what I'll be asking you to do. And I hope it goes well. But until then, I think if does anyone have any kind of questions? We'll come back to this tomorrow and kind of finish discussing it. But does anyone have any kind of burning questions at the moment? Yeah.
Story relating to culture, or story relating to
Either one. Either one. As I say, I'm not entirely sure what you're going to find, so I want to just leave a little bit of wiggle room for you. But I kind of think there'd be some very interesting stuff out there that talks about how stories are connected to culture and what stories tell us about the culture or the society that is telling them. It can be any story you want. Yeah. Are you thinking of something in particular, or just asking the question? Okay.
But if you're choosing a story, then why would you need an article for that?
Well, this is the thing: is I want to know what the author says about the story. So I don't want you to find the story. I want you to find an article that discusses a story, of some sort. And so, the story will depend on what that author is referring to. It should be what?
An article one.
Yes. Yeah, so you don't have to analyze the story, you have to analyze what the person is saying about it. Yeah. Coolio? Okay, I think I will end it there for today. So in about 20 minutes, you'll see that assignment pop up, and you can look at it if you want, but we will come back to it tomorrow and discuss in just a little more detail, okay? So, yeah. Okay, that is it. Have a great day, people. Happy Monday. I'll see you tomorrow.